Hey, what's up, everybody? Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of our very own fee-only certified financial planners. Please note this podcast is intended for educational purposes and should not be considered financial or investment advice, as we do not know all the variables to one's personal situation when answering a question. Before we jump into today's question, a shout out to our extraordinary YFP financial planning team that makes this segment possible. Your Financial Pharmacist offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. So whether you want to pay off your student loans, make the right investment decisions, or simply build a solid financial plan, we'll help get your income working for you rather than the other way around. You can learn more by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from Jennifer in Nashville, Tennessee.
Hi, this is Jennifer from Nashville, Tennessee. My question for you is whether or not it's smart to sell a house that you have a lot of equity in to pay off a huge student loan and take a down payment for a downsized house. We're not sure if there are any liabilities besides having to find a new home. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer, for submitting your question. We featured on this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is I think a question that is a big it depends question, Tim. Jennifer asked, are there any liabilities besides needing to find a new home? So I'm thinking, she's asking like, is this necessarily a good plan or good path to go down or not? And it's definitely interesting, and I think ultimately this would be one that I would love to kind of like get into and kind of really look at the goals and the balance sheet and ultimately determine, is this a path that they should go down. So ultimately she's saying, hey, we have equity in this house, can we spread the love, meaning can we take some of that equity and pay off this huge student loan, and then also leave some money for a down payment for a smaller house. Jennifer, you're in Nashville, so just like a lot of other markets, are still on fire. I think it's coming down somewhat, but I'm still hearing people paying more than offer, what the asking price is. And we were looking at a place on the lake here, Tim. I was just telling you off mic, and before we got there, they're like, hey, somebody just put on an all cash offer. They're taking basically accepting that. So yeah, that's definitely still the market in which we're in, where you would be essentially, Jennifer, selling high, but you're probably, to get back in, you're buying high. And one of the things I would just probably want to work through is, when you're in this market and there's a lot of competition, you're typically driving the price up, and depending on where you are, a $200,000 to $400,000 house, that's where most people are buying more or less. So you're going to have more buyers versus if you go maybe to a higher price point. So if you look at it from a rates perspective, Tim, the rates are a wash. So from Bank Rate, I got this morning on Monday, August 9th, 2021, which is today, the day that we're recording this, the national average for a 30-year fixed mortgage APR is 3.28%. I then went over to one of our partners who has their rates for a 5, a 7, a 10, all the way out to 20 year. And they range from 2.59% to, I think the high on the 20 in is like 3.19 or something like that. So I think the rates are more or less a wash. So mathematically, I think you could say it doesn't make sense from the debt service, but you're going to have things like transaction costs of buying and selling. We know that is a thing, moving costs and things like that. So I think, one of the things that we often ask is like, especially about the student loans, is like, how do you feel about the loans? Yeah. And, obviously that's a big piece, and not having that there, I think you can make the argument that if you do downsize, you're going to have a lot less costs associated with a smaller house. I know one of the big mistakes, Tim, that I made when I bought my first home was that I just bought too big of a house. I was living in probably a third of it. And that might be the case for Jennifer, or that might be, maybe they're just looking at this market and saying like, can we capitalize on that? Which is not an uncommon question for people to be asking. But then you are then taking those dollars and buying high. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. And I would want to look at, other, what does the cash reserves look like? What does the other debt picture look like? How much is a huge student loan amount? Like, to me, these are all kind of the inner workings of a financial plan, and really looking at a balance sheet, and then really have not a hard conversation, but a direct conversation of like, what are we trying to achieve? And it could be one of those things that, again, the home that they're in is a little bit of buyer's remorse because of maybe they bought in the wrong location, or maybe they, bought too big of a home, or what have you. But it is definitely it depends question. And I like the fact that, Jennifer, you're asking this question, because I think that, you're demonstrating that you're willing to kind of get out of the path that you're on to potentially make your financial plan better. But I would just want to talk through like, what is the give and take, in your particular case?
Tim, I love this question because I have a feeling this is, to the point you made about what's happening in the market. This is probably a question and a discussion lots of people are having right now, right? I know Jess and I, just the other day, we got the, email we'll get every so often from Zillow or Redfin, and, it's what your house might be worth. And obviously, take those numbers with a grain of salt. But that led to us a discussion, didn't go very far, but I suspect many people are having something similar when they see those numbers or a house selling in their neighborhood, like, oh man, maybe we should sell, and then buy down.
Yeah.
And so I like this question for that reason. And I think it's a good exercise to think through. Just to echo, Tim, what you said about costs, I think that's an important consideration here, and then also the non-monetary costs of moving, just the time intensity of the packing and all of that involved. But the costs of the transaction costs of the deal, obviously the costs involved with the move. So making sure you're thinking of all those things, especially if, here we're talking about equity in home relative to student loans. So as you mentioned, rates that you rattled off on student loans, probably not a whole lot difference there.
Yeah.
But to your comment about this, I think is an opportunity to even zoom out and have some other fruitful discussions. So here, if I heard the question correctly, it's kind of the question that I heard is, hey, we've got some equity and an opportunity of that equity in our home, and might it be better utilized towards the student loan debt? What else, right? What else is going on in the financial plan? And here we're looking at student loans, but are there other areas where there might be, something of interest if this downsizing were to happen? And then, something that you always talk about, Tim, is let's not just look at the numbers and the quantitative part of the financial plan, but also the qualitative part. So like, what would a downsize mean, and is there anything that we're giving up or not? What does that mean in terms of, community that you're living in and access to certain things? And maybe it's a wash, maybe it's better, maybe it's worse, but not just looking at the numbers, but also looking at those other parts of the plan as well.
Yeah. And the news recently here is that I would even want to know what kind of student loans we're talking about. President Biden just extended the federal student loan pause until I think end of January. So, if you're a federal borrower right now, you're kind of doing a bit of a happy dance because you get a little bit more months of either socking cash away, to beef up your, emergency fund, or, I see a lot of clients, saying, hey, like it's allowed us to save, quicker for a wedding or something else, a vacation. So, that's the thing too. Or is it a, more of a higher interest rate private loan that we can potentially refi and not necessarily transact this, downsize.
That's right.
So yeah, there's just a lot of things on the table here that, because I think when it's all said and done, Tim, like when you talk about the debt here, and again, a lot of people have different opinions about debt, but you can make the mathematical case that if you were to do something like a downsize, maybe you're not applying that to the debt. Maybe you're putting that into an IRA or things like that kind of, get you, greater returns over the course of time. But again, like some people, they look at that student loan debt or even a mortgage debt and they're like, man, I just want to pay this off as quickly as possible. And even Shay and I have had the conversation of like, even paying an additional mortgage payment, which is typically our strategy, you could make the case that couple $1,000s a year or whatever it is not better served there. It's better served somewhere else just because the rates are under 3%, so those are the things, part of it is I don't want to have a mortgage when I'm X years old, but just from a borrower perspective, Tim, it's a good place to be. From a saver perspective, it's not, because, money is just so cheap right now.
Great stuff, Tim. And Jennifer, again, thank you for taking time to submit your question to be featured on this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. And as a small thank you, we're going to be sending you a super comfy YFP t-shirt. And to those listening, if you'd like to have your question featured on an upcoming episode, please go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP or send us an email at info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Have a great rest of your week.